In 1990, Congress passed a law requiring every federal agency to submit to an independent financial audit. Every agency complied, every agency except one. The Department of Defense, which controls the largest discretionary budget of any institution on Earth, has never once passed a full independent audit. Not in 1990, not in 2000, not in 2010. The Pentagon finally attempted its first full audit in 2018, 28 years after the legal requirement was established. It failed. It failed again in 2019 and 2020, and 2021 and 2022, and 2022 and 2023. 6 consecutive failed audits. And in the most recent attempt, auditors found that the Pentagon could not account for the location or condition of a significant portion of its assets. Trillions of dollars in equipment, property, and inventory that the Department of Defense could not verify existed where it was supposed to exist. Not missing, not stolen, just unaccountable. In any private company, a failure of this magnitude would trigger shareholder lawsuits, executive terminations, and potentially criminal referrals to the SEC. In the Pentagon, it triggers a request for a larger budget the following year, and Congress, almost without exception, approves it. This is the story of the American defense budget, how it became untouchable, how the contracts that feed it were designed to never end, how the people who oversee it migrate to the companies they fund, and why $886 billion annual budget has produced systems that do not work, audits that cannot close, and a political structure so carefully engineered that questioning it in an election year is roughly equivalent to questioning the concept of patriotism itself. Let's start with the contracting model, because the financial architecture of defense spending is different from almost every other government expenditure, and the difference is where the money goes. Most government contracts work on a fixed price basis. The government specifies what it wants. A company bids a price. The company delivers. If the company's costs run over the bid, the company absorbs the loss. This creates an incentive to be efficient, accurate, and on time. Defense contracts for major weapon systems frequently operate differently. They often use cost-plus contracts. In a cost-plus arrangement, the government agrees to pay whatever the project actually costs, plus a guaranteed profit margin on top. The profit is calculated as a percentage of costs incurred, which means, structurally and mathematically, a defense contractor on a cost-plus contract earns more profit when the project costs more. Overruns are not a penalty. They are a revenue opportunity. If a program is budgeted at $10 billion and costs $15 billion, the contractor's profit on the cost plus portion is larger at $15 billion than it would have been at $10 billion. The incentive to control costs does not just weaken under this structure, it reverses. And cost overruns in major defense programs are not occasional. They are the norm. The Government Accountability Office tracks major defense acquisition programs annually. In the most recent assessment covering 32 major programs, the total cost growth over original estimates exceeded $628 billion. Not $628 billion in total spending, $628 billion over what was originally promised. A system that was supposed to cost X routinely costs X plus an amount larger than the GDP of most countries. And the programs keep going, because they were designed to keep going. Now, let's make this concrete, because the abstraction of billions makes it easy to disconnect from what is actually happening. The F-35 Joint Street Reich Fighter program. It was conceived in the 1990s as a next-generation, multi-role combat aircraft that would replace several older platforms across multiple branches of the military, and be sold to allied nations as well. The original cost estimate for the program, approximately $233 billion. The current total program cost estimate, approximately $1.7 trillion. That is not a typo. $1.7 trillion, with a T, for a single weapons program that has been in development for over 25 years and still faces ongoing technical limitations, including structural problems, software deficiencies, and a sustainment cost that the Pentagon's own Inspector General has flagged as unsustainable over the aircraft's projected operational life. The cost per aircraft, when you factor in development and sustainment, runs to hundreds of millions of dollars per plane. An aircraft so expensive that retiring admirals have said publicly the military cannot afford to risk it in the environments it was designed to operate in. The program is too expensive to use aggressively and too embedded to cancel. Because here is how the F-35 and programs like it become too big to cancel. Lockheed Martin, the prime contractor, deliberately spread production across suppliers in 45 states. 45 states, nearly every congressional district in the country, has some economic stake in the F-35 program's continuation. Jobs, contracts, local suppliers, component manufacturers. A senator who votes to cancel or significantly cut the F-35 program is voting to eliminate jobs in their own state. That is not a coincidence. It is a strategy. The geographic distribution of defense contracts is not optimized for manufacturing efficiency. It is optimized for political survival. Every major defense program is a jobs program first, and a weapons program second, and the jobs are located with the precision of a congressional vote count, which is why programs that should have been canceled on performance grounds survive for decades past the point where any rational cost-benefit analysis would recommend termination. The B-2 stealth bomber was designed for a Cold War mission that no longer existed by the time the planes were delivered. The Army's Future Combat Systems program consumed $18 billion before being canceled with nothing to show for it. The Littoral Combat Ship was supposed to cost $220 million. Per Volt Essel, it averaged over $500 million. Multiple ships have been retired less than a decade after delivery due to reliability failures. In each case, the program survived far longer than merit justified because the contract distribution made cancellation politically painful. And in each case, the companies responsible for the overruns and failures continue to receive new contracts because there are only a handful of companies capable of delivering major defense systems. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. These 5 companies collect the majority of Pentagon prime contract dollars. They are effectively irreplaceable, which means accountability is effectively optional. A contractor that delivers a failed program late and over budget does not lose future business the way a commercial vendor would. They are the only game in town for the next program, and everyone involved knows it. Now, let's talk about the revolving door, because the contracting structure alone does not explain the durability of this system. The relationship between the Pentagon and its contractors is maintained by a flow of personnel, so consistent and so well documented that it has become a subject of annual reporting. Senior Pentagon officials, generals, admirals, undersecretaries, program managers, regularly move from government positions overseeing defense contracts to private positions at the companies receiving those contracts. A 2021 report found that of the 700 most senior officials who left the Pentagon over a recent 5-year period, a majority took jobs with defense contractors. The cooling-off periods required by law, typically 1 to 2 years before a former official can lobby their old agency, are widely regarded as insufficient barriers given the depth of relationships and institutional knowledge being monetized. And the flow goes both ways. Defense company executives move into Pentagon roles, where they oversee programs that affect their former employers, their former colleagues, their unvested stock options, and the industry they will likely return to when their government service ends. This is not a conspiracy. It is a career track. It is legal, documented, and defended by both parties as a necessary feature of managing complex technical programs. The counterargument is that the people best qualified to oversee the development of complex weapons systems are often the people who have spent careers building them. That argument has merit. It also describes a system where the line between regulator and regulated has been so thoroughly blurred as to be largely theoretical. Now here is the historical moment that named this problem nearly 65 years ago. In January 1961, President Dwight Eisenhower, a 5-star general and the supreme commander of Allied forces in World War II, not a cynic, not a critic of military strength, delivered his farewell address to the nation. In it, he warned of the acquisition of unwarranted influence by what he called the military-industrial complex. He said the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power existed and would persist. He said an engaged citizenry was the only check on it. This warning came from the man who built the post, war American military, a man who knew the system from the inside. And in the 65 years since that speech, the defense budget has grown from roughly $400 billion in today's dollars to $886 billion. The number of major contractors has consolidated. The revolving door has industrialized. The geographic distribution of contracts has been perfected. And the audit requirement that was supposed to bring financial accountability has been failed 6 consecutive times by a department that knows Congress will fund it regardless. Eisenhower named the problem. Nobody in a position of power has successfully addressed it since. Now, None of this is an argument that defense spending is inherently wasteful or that military strength is not worth paying for. The United States operates in a world where adversaries are real, threats are genuine, and the cost of inadequate defense can be measured in outcomes far more serious than budget overruns. The argument is not that defense spending should not be large. It is that a system this large, this insulated from accountability, this structurally resistant to scrutiny, and this consistently unable to pass a basic financial audit, has lost the connective tissue between spending and outcome that any functioning system requires. When cost overruns are profitable, efficiency dies. When cancellation is politically impossible, performance becomes optional. When oversight officials become contractor employees, the oversight becomes a formality. And when an institution can fail 6 consecutive audits with no consequence beyond a request for more money, the word accountability has lost its operational meaning. So what do you do with this information? First, understand that the defense budget is a political document as much as it is a security document. When you see a new weapons program announced, look at how the contracts are distributed geographically before you evaluate the military rationale. The distribution pattern tells you something about why the program is funded that the press release does not. Second, understand that cost-plus contracting is a policy choice, not a necessity. The government uses fixed-price contracts successfully across many domains. Expanding their use in defense acquisition would require contractors to absorb cost growth rather than pass it to taxpayers. The opposition to this shift is intense and well-funded, for reasons that are arithmetically obvious. Third, understand that the audit failure is not a technical problem. It is an accountability problem. An institution that has never passed an audit has no verified basis for claiming its spending is appropriate, efficient, or necessary. Every defense budget passed without a clean audit is Congress writing a check to an institution that cannot demonstrate it knows where the money went. That is not a national security posture. That is a blank check with a flag on it. So I want to hear where you land. Do you think the defense budget and its contracting system are necessary and appropriate given the complexity of modern threats and the genuine need for technological superiority, with waste being an unavoidable cost of operating at this scale? Be a self-perpetuating industrial machine that has captured the political process and now funds itself through geographic distribution, and revolving door relationships regardless of strategic merit, or C, something in between, where the mission is real, but the financial accountability and contracting structure are broken in ways that cost taxpayers hundreds of billions without improving actual security outcomes. Drop your take in the comments, because this is one of the few topics where people across the entire political spectrum have found reasons to agree that something is wrong, even if they cannot agree on what to do about it. And the next time the defense budget passes with broad bipartisan support, and the vote is described as supporting the troops, remember that supporting the troops and funding a system that cannot account for trillions of dollars in assets are not the same thing. One of them is patriotism. The other is a contract structure. And the people who design the contract structure are counting on you not knowing the difference.